Hello, and welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour, the weekly bridge to the future of the piano tech community. I'm David Anderson.
And I'm Eathan Janney. And we're here to ask great questions, and then we'll shut up and listen to some of the authorities, experts, and most outstanding personalities in our little world of pianos.
So, put on your best set of headphones, and let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour. Happy 4th of July weekend. I hope you're having a good time. It's a pleasure to have you with us on this at this special time. We're grateful to the stalwarts who show up with us on holiday weekends and through thick and thin. And there are those of you that are always with us, and we appreciate it. It's going to be a good show. If you're there out on socials, Facebook, YouTube, we'll put some links into the chat there so that you can jump into the Zoom call if you want to participate in the chat, get a little bit closer to the action. And we're about to get started here, but we're just kind of letting people get their seats and get comfortable. We'll give an intro to the program if you haven't been here before. We'll give an intro to our guest for today, and then we'll get rolling. But yeah, in the meantime, we're just kind of letting people catch their seats. Our guest for today is Molly Gebrian. Is that how you say it? Is that how you like to pronounce
yeah.
it? Okay.
Very good. I'm impressed. Most people say it wrong, so.
Okay. I won't ask how they say it wrong. That'll put some. We'll actually talk about how giving some people the wrong information in their head, even if you're telling them the wrong information so that they get it right, may not be a good idea. That's probably something that you've learned in your research,
right,
about practicing. But yeah, we'll get started here in just a minute, and I'll give an intro to the program. This is Piano Tech Radio Hour, and what we do here is we gather every Saturday to meet with and learn from the most fascinating and knowledgeable folks in the piano world and beyond. This includes manufacturers, rebuilders, musicians, makers of other instruments, and of course, piano techs. Our mutual goal is to become better at our craft, to help each other, and to create an ever more musical world together. Piano Tech Radio Hour is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, an online learning resource that brings you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You can find out more at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. You can also subscribe to just this program, Piano Tech Radio Hour, for $16 a month. You get direct access to each week's private Zoom call, as well as all the archival recordings of well over 200 episodes in our member area. You can join using the link bit.ly/joinptrh. That's bit.ly/joinptrh. Always like to remind you, we have the audio-only versions of this program on the podcast. You can look that up at pianotechradio.com. Great to listen to while you're on the go, in the car, in the workshop, doing dishes, working out, whatever people do while they're listening to those podcasts. We're popular all over the world. We've reached top 100, top 10, even #1 status in the performing arts category on iTunes in various locations all over the world. Very proud to have a global audience. You can also check out the Substack blog, where we give you little sneak previews into our members-only content from the Piano Technicians Masterclasses site. Yeah, there we learn about really obscure but very useful things for the high end, like how are pianos designed? What are the histories of the piano or the action? We could learn about different instruments like the pianoforte or the harpsichord. All sorts of information you really can't find anywhere else. You check out that blog, you'll get a little sneak peek and see if you want to dive in a little bit deeper. Always check out our socials, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as visiting our website at pianotechniciansmasterclass.com to get on the email list, and you'll always get updates about what's going on in this program. And then, of course, we have monthly master classes in various topics. We started in just the piano tech domain, but we've branched out and we've got master classes on everything from, again, the history of the piano action to from the perspective of a piano technician, all the way to the perspective of an expert in playing pianofortes or the piano, as well as things in conducting, composition, all kinds of cool stuff. All right, let's go into transition to our guest for today. We'll give a little bit of an intro for Dr. Molly Gebrian. She is a professional violist, author, and educator who bridges the worlds of music performance and neuroscience. With degrees from Oberlin, New England Conservatory, and Rice University, she's known for championing works by underrepresented composers, and for her groundbreaking research on how the brain learns and remembers music. Molly performs internationally, teaches at the New England Conservatory, and is the author of Learn Faster, Perform Better, Oxford University Press, 2024, helping musicians transform their practice through science-based strategies. Molly, welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour.
Thanks for having me. Especially, I'm not a pianist. I'm honored to be an honorary pianist today.
You're an honorary pianist today. At least you've got those what is it, the left-hand fingers working hard?
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So we could probably compete there on manual dexterity
That's
in
right.
that domain. But yeah, I think we're probably going to talk majority about what you've written about today and about your understanding of practice. But I always like to dive a little bit into memory lane at the beginning and find a little bit of the foundations. So do you remember your first experiences with music and how those actually led to you becoming a professional today?
I don't actually. My mom has this story of when I was 2, she took me to the local symphony because they had a children's concert of some sort. And it featured apparently a violinist. And I said, Mommy, what's that? And she said, Oh, it's a violin. And I said, I want to play that. And she's like, Okay, you're 2. Like, what do you know? But apparently I kept asking to play the violin. So finally, when I was 7, she got me lessons. I don't actually remember my lesson. I remember being nervous for it because I didn't,
Mhm.
know what it was, and it's going to be this
Yeah.
new thing, but also excited, right? Because I'd wanted to play for so long. So as a kid, I actually played violin, cello, and viola. I started cello in
Wow.
the school system. Everybody started an instrument in 4th grade. And I had already been playing in the school orchestra, and I was better than all the kids because I'd been taking private lessons since I was 7. I was bored. So I was like, well, I'll start the cello. Why not? At the end of 4th grade, again, I was bored. I was better than all the kids because I'd been playing violin and I had so much foundation. And my orchestra director at school was like, why don't you play the viola? And I had never even heard of that. And he's like, here's a viola, teach yourself the clef over the summer. And yeah, so I played all 3 for many years, actually. And now I'm just a violist. I picked the best one.
And what is it about the viola that you find the most appealing? My son actually takes cello lessons,
Nice.
and I, as is relatively clear, I play the piano primarily. I always thought if I were to take another instrument, I wanted to do the cello. So it's been kind of advantageous, and I've learned a little bit about the
Cool.
cello. But yeah, what do you like about the viola?
Yeah, I mean, for me, like the violin is too high. I like the sound of the viola a lot better. I really love cello, but I never took private lessons. I took violin and viola lessons kind of from the beginning, essentially. I never really took cello lessons, and so it never really made sense to me. I kind of tried to play it like I mean, I played it like a cello, but I held the bow like a violin bow. I did fingerings kind of more like violin fingerings. And so it never really made sense to me. And so it was clear that like I wasn't gonna really continue with cello. And then um violin and viola, I actually the reason I became a professional musician, I got very injured when I was 15. I got tendonitis really badly in both wrists, and I had to take the entire summer off from playing. And that's when I realized, like, oh my God, I really, really, really miss this. Like when it was taken away from me, that's when I realized how much it meant to me and how much I loved it. And that summer that happened, I also attended a music camp, a music festival for the first time, and that was a really transformative experience for me. And it made me realize that it was possible to have a career as a musician. I hadn't really like connected that before, even though obviously I was surrounded by professional musicians, my teachers growing up. But that kind of connected for me. And then realizing like, oh my God, I really miss this. I love this. That's when I decided to go into music. But also that summer, the doctor who treated me, who specializes in musicians' injuries, he was like, you have to choose at this point between violin and viola if you want to recover, because they're using slightly different muscles in slightly different ways.
Mm.
Because you're injured, it will be better if you choose. And at that point, I was so glad to have an excuse to give up violin. I didn't really like playing violin anymore. So it was, yeah, it was a very easy and obvious choice for me.
Hmm. Okay. That's yeah, I can see what you're saying too. There is a richness, right, that you're gonna
Right.
get out of a viola that you're just not gonna get out of a violin. for
Right.
most, for most of the range and for what
Yeah,
you're doing.
exactly.
I can
And
appreciate that.
personality wise, like violinists tend to be, this is a stereotype, obviously. Violinists tend to be more like divas. They like to be in the spotlight. Violists, we tend to like, we're community builders. We like to like be in the background more, and that's much more my personality. So that worked too.
I'm just thinking also about saxophones. I don't know if you know much about saxophones, but I know you have, of course, you have the soprano sax, which is relatively rarely used. You have the alto, and you have the tenor saxophone. I feel like and just tell me if this is totally not your domain. I feel like what I like about the tenor saxophone as opposed to the alto is kind of exactly this, a little bit more richness, a
Yeah.
little bit more thickness in the tone. But I don't know that the viola reaches down as far as the tenor saxophone. Do you know, is it
I don't
considered a tenor instrument? Is it still
It is
considered like a
considered, yeah, I mean, yeah. So I don't know the range off the top of my head of the tenor saxophone, but I know that in
yeah.
saxophone quartets, so soprano, alto, tenor, and then bari sax, like the
Hmm.
tenor plays like the viola part
It does. Okay.
equivalent, right? And yeah, I don't know the exact range of it. The viola is considered both an alto and a tenor instrument depending on how it's used. It can play different roles. So yeah, that's a good analogy to tenor sax.
Okay. All right.
Saxophone
Um,
players can weigh in and yell at us.
yeah, we don't saxophoners are far outside our wheelhouse. I don't know if listen, it's got to be on my agenda now to get a saxophone player on the
That's
program.
right.
Don't know that I have had one. They're fascinating. But yeah, that's also, I appreciate what you said about the kind of, a little bit more low key, a little bit
Yeah.
more, just grounded instrument to play. That makes a lot of sense. Let's talk a little bit about your trajectory as a professional here,
Mhm.
and when you first noticed the creep of these alternate topics coming into your domain of saying, oh, wow, the brain, how does that work? How, practicing, not just, oh, I just need to practice, but how do I practice
How do I
and how does
practice?
that all work? Yeah.
Right. So the question about practicing actually started when I was recovering from the injury, because when I came back, I was allowed to practice for 2 minutes the first day, then 4 minutes, then 6 minutes. I had to come back to playing very, very, very slowly. So I had to learn how to practice much more efficiently than I had before because I had such little time. But the science piece of it came in. I went to Oberlin for undergrad, and I knew that I wanted to double major in viola and something. When I got there, I only applied to double degree programs as an undergrad. But I have so many different interests. I always have. I didn't know what I wanted to double major in. But then my first semester freshman year, I took a freshman only symposium or something on neuroscience. And it was hands down the most fascinating thing I'd ever learned about. I took it kind of on a whim, like it just looked really interesting in the course catalog. And I was like, okay, sure, like I'll take this. And like within 2 weeks, I was like, this is what I want to double major in. This is so interesting. And so I double majored in viola and neuroscience at Oberlin. The neuroscience was truly just for fun. I always say that when I tell this story because I had zero plans to go on with it. I just wanted to learn about brains because I thought they were fascinating. And then after Oberlin, I went to New England Conservatory for my master's. Obviously, I had decided not to do anything with neuroscience, which has kind of been the plan all along. But I got to NEC and I really quickly realized that I really missed the neuroscience. And I was like, well, what do I do now? I'm at a conservatory, like I can't take neuroscience classes. So I'm very fortunate that NEC allowed me to do a number of independent studies looking into aspects of music in the brain, just like, again, for my own research, and give me course credit for it, which was awesome. And that's when I really started to combine the two at the end of my studies at Oberlin. That's when I had really started to see the connections between what I was learning in my neuroscience classes and what my viola professor was teaching me about good practice habits. I was like, there's a lot of overlap here. And so the first independent study I did at NEC was to look into the research on learning to see, okay, what have scientists found about how the brain learns? And then how could I apply that as a musician to my practicing? And again, it was just for me to practice better. And then after that, I went to Rice University to do my doctorate, and I was back at a research institution. So even though I was doing my doctorate in viola, I was able to take graduate level neuroscience classes pretty much the whole time I was there. And I was also, there's a composition professor at Rice who has a real interest in cognitive science. And he and I together, I was the, what was my title? I was the assistant director for two interdisciplinary symposia on music and the brain. And to get the student body sort of excited about that so that they would be sort of involved when the event took place, the school asked me to teach this lunchtime series they called Pizza and Brains. The school supplied free pizza and soda for the students to come. You feed people, they show up. And then I basically for an hour, like taught people anything I wanted essentially about music and the brain. And it was the first time I'd really like shared that information with other people. Up to that point, it was just for my own interest. And one, I discovered that people found it really interesting. It wasn't just me who found it interesting. And two, I was like, wow, this is really fun, like sharing this with other people. And so that's when I really started combining it in a way to share with other people. And then for the last 10 years, I've been a viola professor at different universities. And alongside everything I've been doing as a viola professor, I was also presenting very often, writing articles for journals or whatever about the science of practicing. I have a YouTube channel where I make long form videos on that stuff. So it's just kind of evolved organically. And now, like you said, I teach at New England Conservatory and I teach classes on the science of practicing. I work with students on that. So now it's the focus of what I do. I'm no longer a viola professor.
Yeah. So, and then also when you're teaching classes, is that it like one a semester? Is it a couple of semester? Like how prevalent is that aspect of what you're doing there?
Yeah, so at NEC in the fall, I teach a class on the science of practicing. It's basically my book in class form. And then in the spring, I teach a class on, it's basically music perception and cognition, like how does the brain process music? So those are the classes, but I also teach a number of workshops at NEC for whoever wants me to come talk to them about brains, the prep school, the continuing ed school, studio professors that have me coming into studio class, faculty development, all sorts of things. And then I also have 6 hours set aside each week to work one-on-one with students on any practice questions they have. It's awesome. Any student can sign up and come talk to me, and we talk about practicing for however long they signed up for. It's kind of amazing that NEC is paying me to offer that to their students. I would have loved something like that as a student myself, to be like, I don't know what to do with this. Person who knows about this, please help me. So that's been really amazing and really fun to get to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, I feel like this is a great combo, you and me, to talk about this. You know, I've studied the brain. I told you a little bit about this. I also studied, you know, the musical brain in a sense because I studied birdsong.
Yeah,
And
cool.
and the birds, they practice, you know,
Yeah,
or
they
however
do.
you want to call it, right? You
Right,
know, you hear the little chicks, you know, doing their
right.
chitter chatters, and it slowly but surely turns into their adult song, and it has little influences of the other adults that are around it and stuff. And so that's one of the animal models, right, for
Right.
musical practice, language learning, and things like that. So it'll be fun to talk about that some more. In terms of being so at Rice, where's Rice located?
It's in Houston, Texas.
Oh, that's in Houston, Texas. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how much have you been interfaced with academics in neuroscience? So I guess at Rice, you were taking classes with people who studied neuroscience as their official, you know, focus, right? You were in the same classes with those people, and then also, I guess, interfacing with researchers in the domain as well. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So at Rice, I was in class with the PhD neuroscience students.
Mhm.
I wasn't majoring in that, right? So I had to get special permission and they were like,
Sure.
why do you want to do this? And I was like, just, am I allowed? And they were like, okay, but you're going to fail our classes. One of my neuroscience professors told my parents at one of my recitals, she was like, Molly outperforms every student in the class, which is embarrassing because they are PhD students in this subject and Molly is not. And my parents were like, oh, thank you. But anyway, so yeah, I took classes pretty much every semester I was at Rice, neuroscience classes. I worked in a lab for a long time there. There was one of the professors I took a lot of classes with. Her lab studies music, not music, language perception and
Okay.
production.
Sure.
Um, and at the time that I was at Rice, I was the only person in the lab, or one of the only people in the lab who spoke English as a native language. And so everybody had an accent except for me. And that particular lab worked with a lot of people who had had strokes or other types of brain damage, looking at how did they recover from that. And they would come into the lab and do various tests and whatever. And it was really hard for them if somebody had an accent. So I
Mm.
got to work with a lot of the individuals that came into the lab. It was so cool. It was so fun. It was great to get to know them. It was great to get to see these things that I had read about like in textbooks, like in real life. So and then I also did a lot of just like a lot of people in the lab were doing language perception work where people would come in and like listen to something on a computer and it needed to be recorded by a voice that was neutral. So I did a lot of recording of like random words and random, creating stimuli. So, which was also interesting and kind of fun. So,
Yeah, that sounds great. Great, great little tasks or big
right,
tasks or whatever that you can do as the musician in the room.
right, right,
Yeah,
exactly. And there were a number of people in the lab who did have sort of a side interest in music perception or language and music.
sure.
I don't think there was any, I'm trying to remember if there was any research going on in the lab specifically looking at the two when I was there. I don't think there was, but I had a lot of interesting conversations, obviously, with people on those things.
Yeah. All right, let's get into the facts of the matter here, kind of what you've learned. Um, I feel like just just as another comment here, my young son is taking these cello lessons, as I said, and I took piano lessons when I was a kid. When I took piano lessons, my mom didn't, the parents could go practice. And
Yeah,
even my teacher, did you practice?
right.
Yeah, and this whole idea, I think it's a lot better these days, from what I see, but kids don't naturally know how to practice,
No,
but there's
nobody
almost this
does.
assumption that if you just tell them to practice, they'll get better at
Right,
something.
right.
Um, so I guess I'll just go to this question. I don't know that you have a direct answer for it, but is there sort of like a set of a rubric or something that you think of when you just think of any musician, you've
Mhm.
got some time, you've been told to practice, and you
Yes.
haven't been getting everything specific to do there,
Yeah,
except maybe a song you're supposed to improve upon or some exercise you're supposed to do. How to approach that
right.
so that you're doing what you should be doing as a practicing musician. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You are absolutely right that very few people are actually taught to practice. They're just
Yeah.
told, go practice. And what am I supposed to do? Like, what does that mean? So yes, I do actually have an answer for you. So in very broad terms, what practicing should look like is problem solving and specific problem solving. So you always want to go into your practice session with a goal or a set of goals for yourself as specific as possible. So if you've been given like a song to learn from your teacher, for instance, like what is the hardest part of that song? What are you really struggling with? And be as specific as you can. Like, this particular measure isn't, I can't play this particular measure because I don't know the rhythm or something like that. Um, and then what is your goal for the practice session? Like maybe you're going to try to play that rhythm in isolation correctly 5 times in a row or something like that. Or maybe you can do it in isolation, but you can't do it in context. So your goal is going to be doing it in context. But anyways, have a goal, have, how you're going to work on it, and then go into the practice session. And it's important to sort of monitor how you're doing. Often people are kind of playing mindlessly when they're practicing and they're not really self-assessing either in terms of like, how does it sound, good or bad, but also trying to self-assess like, okay, if you did a good job, how did you do that? You need to know that so you can recreate it. Or if things are going wrong, why are they going wrong? Very often musicians are just like, well, that sounds terrible. It's like, okay, that's nice, but why? Because you can't solve it if you don't know the why, right? And then figuring out, the why of why is it good, why is it bad, and then sort of solidifying it in broader terms, something that gets left out of the conversation a lot is the importance of taking breaks and what's known as interleaving. So we tend to think, like culturally in general, that we should do things for a big block of time and just like sit down and focus on this thing for a big block of time. but the research is exceptionally clear that we'll make a lot more progress a lot faster and retain what we're trying to learn if we practice in shorter segments with breaks between them, either breaks within the day or breaks across many days. So for instance, if you're going to study for an exam, you're much better off practicing or studying, sorry, studying for an hour over 3 days than 3 hours all at once. Or even better, half an hour over 6 days rather than an hour over 3 days, something like that.
Yes.
Within a practice session, we also think that we should just like, okay, focus on this one thing, get that one thing. Once you've got that, move on to the next, focus on that. But the research is exceptionally clear that you'll make a lot more progress and you'll retain it better if you are constantly switching between things. That's what interleaving is, that you're interleaving your various things. So if you have 3 things to work on, let's just say to make it easy, rather than doing 1, 2, 3, done, you want to constantly cycle between them and come back to them. Because when you come back, your brain gets kind of a refresh on what was that thing again? Oh, yeah, right. And that reminder helps it stick better in your brain. So in terms of using your time, that often gets left out of the conversation entirely.
Okay. I've got an analogy here from my recent experience. And I
Yes.
don't know what the biochemistry of it but maybe there's something here too. So uh I recently let my 7-year-old have some berries in a little thing on his bunk bed, and then all of a sudden they spilled out, and there was these little blue stains everywhere on the blanket,
Uh-huh.
and then his mom was like, "What happened? There's stains all
Yeah.
over this thing. You gotta get these out." It's such yeah. So, anyways, I learned about the power of baking soda and vinegar, and I looked it up how you do it, right? And you put some vinegar on it. You gotta let it sit for about 10 minutes,
Yeah.
right? And then you gotta come back and you gotta put some baking soda on it, and you gotta let that sit for a little bit.
Yeah.
But you can't just put vinegar on and then put baking soda on and put vinegar on. It's gonna get out. You gotta let it sit, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so I had all these little blueberry stains. So I could work on one stain, let
Uh-huh.
that sit, then work on the other stain, then that's it, and then come back to the first one, right? It
Yeah.
sounds like it's almost like a similar process, right?
Yeah.
You gotta let it soak in,
Yeah.
and there's something going on that's soaking in. And even from a biochemical perspective, it literally could be that there's molecules, neurotransmitters like that are soaking into
Right.
maybe
I
there's
can
some
I can
growth
tell you what
hormone that's
happens.
being
Yeah.
delivered. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Tell us.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really good analogy. I really love that actually, because you have to, in that case, you have to let the chemical reaction take place, right? For the vinegar and then the
Mhm.
baking soda to break down
Yes.
the stain and get rid of it. In the brain, in order for us to learn anything, get better at anything, the brain has to make actual physical changes to itself, both at the level of the synapse, which is where 2 neurons are close to each other and communicate with each other, but also like bigger structural changes. But the brain has to make actual physical changes to itself. And that takes time, just like the chemical reaction with the vinegar and the baking soda. And the analogy that I often use, actually, because people kind of have had experience with this often, is building muscle. So when you're trying to get stronger, you don't actually get stronger in the workout itself, right? You create micro tears in your muscle, and your body then repairs the muscle on your rest days. And then you're stronger when you come back. And if you do leg day every day in a row, that isn't going to work very well, right? Because the body doesn't have that time to repair the muscle. It's essentially the same in the brain. You don't create micro tears in your brain, but like you give your brain the input while you're practicing, and then your brain actually does something with it when you're resting, just like a rest day after a workout. And then you come back and the brain has done that physical reconstruction. And so you're at a higher level of skill, just like with your muscles, you're at a higher level of strength.
Yeah. Yeah. That is great. I also thought of an analogy of meetings. I do some management in the work that I do, and there's actually this really great framework that I've been studying. It's called the entrepreneurial operating system. Part of the thing is they have a meeting structure which they recommend.
Mhm.
And I've studied other meeting structures. You've got your sprints that people do for what is it called, Kanban, and all these different things. But the key thing that's going on is, people don't like meetings because sometimes people don't know how to run meetings. You get in
Yeah.
a meeting and they're like, "Hey, what are you doing? How's it going?" Yeah, and it's all this like kind of blah blah blah. Nobody knows what's going on. But from what my research is, the most efficient meetings is, hey, let's just figure out, what were you supposed to do?
Mhm.
How's it going?
Mhm.
Is there a problem? Is there a
Mhm.
roadblock? Let's fix it. and then what are you going to do next, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds very similar to
Yeah.
your approach to practice. It's got to be about what are the roadblocks,
Right.
and let's fix the roadblocks, and really
Right.
nothing else. There's no doodling around or whatever.
Right.
It's that's what the whole deal is, right?
Right. Yep, exactly. That's a great analogy. And I think everybody has experienced meetings that are like, what is happening? This is the biggest waste of time ever. Nothing is happening. And I think that's how a lot of people practice. They practice like those useless meetings where they just go around in circles and nothing gets done.
Yeah. All right. I've got a few notes here on kind of the content here of your book. So let's talk a little bit about um, efficient use of time.
Mhm.
Okay, maybe you covered it right in what you said, but how do you find people can optimize the actual time that they use for practice?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, I'll start big picture in terms of like scheduling your time.
Mhm.
Um, so you never want to practice for more than like 25 to 30 minutes without at least a 5-minute break. People have often heard of the Pomodoro technique, which is
Yeah.
the same thing, right? And that's what scientists have found about like what's optimal for the brain after 25 to 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break. But also doctors who work with musicians who get injured, they have found that that is really optimal for protecting the body too. So it's great. So every 25 to 30 minutes, take a 5-minute break. And then after an hour to an hour and a half at the most, with 5-minute breaks, obviously every half hour, then you want to take a much longer break, like an hour and a half to a 2-hour break, because your brain needs like a full break. So often people will try to practice in these big 2-3 hour blocks of time. And you're just burning your brain out if you do that. So you want to practice. It's fine to practice shorter than what I just said, but you definitely don't want to practice for longer than that without longer breaks. And that will make the time much more efficient just in and of itself, because your brain will be able to focus better because you're giving it the breaks that it needs. And like we were just saying, when you take like that longer break, your brain's going to be doing stuff.
Mhm.
Um, you don't want to practice for more than 4 to 5 hours total in a day. Many people think, oh, you should practice for 6, 8, 10 hours. Like, no, again, you're burning your brain out. That's not a good use of time. In the practice session itself, a lot of this I did already just say, just, like have goals for yourself, have specific goals, be monitoring yourself. Two things I didn't mention that really help make the practice session more efficient is recording yourself often. People are often very hesitant to do that because they think they sound terrible. But the way that people often record themselves is not the most helpful. People tend to, do their practice session, and then at the end of the practice, they'll play through an entire movement or something like that, or entire piece and record that, and then listen back and they're overwhelmed by everything they hear that sounds terrible. A much better way to use recording in the process of learning is, pick out your specific thing that needs work, like we were saying, be really specific. And either once you think it sounds good, record that little bit. It's probably going to be like 10 seconds of music or something like that, right? Record that and see how that little bit sounds. Does it actually sound good? And maybe you'll hear, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Okay. And now you move on. Or maybe you'll hear, oh, there's some things I didn't notice. And then you can fix those rather than having to wait until your teacher tells you those things. The other way to use recording is if something isn't working and you can't figure out why it sounds bad, record yourself. And often it's much more obvious when you hear it, or if you video record, if you see yourself play it, that you can't really tell when you're playing yourself, but then you hear the recording and you're like, oh, I'm like really out of tune there, or I'm really rushing. That's why it sounds terrible. Um, and so it can help the diagnostic process. So recording yourself is a way to make practicing much more efficient. And then along the lines of breaks, is to take what are known as micro breaks, like 10, 15-second little breaks where you do literally nothing. Like I get a drink of water, I look out the window, I just kind of space out. There's a very cool study that I talk about a lot from 2021 where they had people learn essentially a button press sequence on a computer keyboard, and they would practice it for 10 seconds and then they'd take a 10-second micro break. Then they'd practice it for 10 seconds, 10-second micro break. And what they found when they analyzed the data is that the vast majority of the improvement was due to the breaks, not the actual practicing itself. They had people hooked up to a brain scanner the whole time, and they found that in the breaks, the brain was replaying what they were practicing 20 times faster. So the brain was doing this super fast forward replay, and that's what was making the progress. So that study only came out in 2021. So I have only been taking micro breaks since 2021, but it makes a huge difference in how quickly I can learn things, how well I retain them. So I would say I practice in 30-minute segments, like I said, and I would say if I added up all my micro breaks over the course of those 30 minutes, they'd probably end up adding up to like 10 minutes of time. Like I take a lot of them. And it makes a huge difference. At first it was like, why am I wasting so much of my time not playing? But I learn so much faster now because of those micro breaks and the bigger breaks too. But
Yeah. Yeah, I've run into so much evidence
mhm.
that doing things that people typically would go, uh-oh, what is this guy doing? You're wasting your
Yeah,
time, can be so productive.
right.
And it's hopefully as time progresses, these things leak into the common psychology and they become more prevalent. But it's actually, difficult to implement certain things
Yeah,
because of there's a culture, a
right,
residual culture around, oh my gosh, here's somebody, they're just sitting there. Okay.
right.
They're not practicing, they're not a serious musician or whatever, even all sorts of different domains. I actually did some personal training with uh, he was a Canadian all-star football player, right? But
Nice.
this guy was beefed up, man. He looked jacked, and he was like, he's retired, and he was in his 50s or something, and he still
Yeah.
looked jacked. And I did some trading with him, so we did some training, and when I got started, I thought this guy was going to be like, "Hey, and then you get down there and you do the push-ups, keep doing it and push yourself and harder and all this stuff." And he sat down and he said, "Okay, let's come up with a routine that you could do in 15 minutes a day." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yep, and it's just going to be 6 exercises, and
And that's
don't
it.
push yourself. Just take it easy. It's got to be something that you can maintain." And we looked at the diet. He's like, "We're just going to do a little journal of your diet for a few days. We'll just find 2 or 3 foods you're going to stop eating, and it's going to be fine, right?" And you go and you look at these people and they're so intimidating, right? A
Yeah,
musician who's virtuosic and they're doing these
right,
amazing things, and you're like, this is totally unattainable. Or this person that's doing these physical feats, and you
right,
can't imagine that in order to do those things, that there's a certain amount of time they're just looking at their watch.
right,
you know
right,
it's like waiting.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
So anyways, there's a lot to
scary.
reinforce these concepts, yes.
Yeah,
But
totally.
you have to find ways to I think there's sometimes a battle at,
Yeah.
at play. I don't know if you've encountered that at all. Have you encountered that? Like
Yeah, I
even
mean,
maybe with your
it's
colleagues, that, some of these really serious musicians who are just kind of slave drivers. I don't know. You
right. No,
encountered any of this?
definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's a very counterintuitive thing that you make more progress by sitting around. Like
Hmm.
that doesn't
Yeah.
really make sense. And it's interesting what the reaction has been to this when I talk about it. Some people immediately are like, "Oh my gosh, that makes so much sense," because of some other experience they've had that they've seen, like, "Oh, now I understand why that happened," and they immediately adopt this. Other people are like, I don't know, but okay, I'll give it a try. They're kind of reluctant, but they're open to it. And then other people are like, absolutely not. You have no idea what you're talking about. This is, and I'm like, that's fine. Like, I know that I know what I'm talking about. The research, especially on breaks, it goes back to the 1880s. It's not like it's new information. It's very old information and it's very well established. Um, and like that's fine. If they don't want to listen to me, they're wrong, but like, that's fine. But yeah, it's been very interesting seeing people's reaction because there's definitely people who are like, nope, nope, don't want to listen, plug my ears. Okay,
Mm.
fine. You can make your life more difficult if you want to.
All right. So here's a hybrid, which I know you talk about as well, which is the mental practice, right?
Yes.
So you're not actually working on an instrument.
Right.
This is also kind of fun. I have a real world example. I've got my 7-year-old. I'm sure this is because his brain is changing so much. He had
Yeah.
learned things in his lessons
Mhm.
that he could do, and now all of a sudden he can't do them.
Mm.
And his teacher's like, "What's going
What's
on? You
going
can't
on?
do these. You used to be able to do these." And he hasn't been consistently as practicing, but we were on our way, or we were just driving around or something. I said, "Buddy, practice. Let's practice just with your fingers,
Yeah.
on your knee or whatever."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Papa, what are we doing? Like, this is such a bad idea." First of all, one interesting thing, the first time he did it, he was doing the fingerings with his right hand,
Hmm.
even though typically he'd be doing with his left hand.
Left
I found
hand.
that fascinating. He's kind
Yeah.
of ambidextrous, and somehow that just transferred, and he still practiced it. Um, and I had him do it, and we did one or two songs that way. I couldn't get him to do it for that long because he was just so skeptical. But sure enough, that song in the actual lesson, he didn't make the mistakes, right?
I
Because
believe
he's
it.
just moving his little fingers and thinking it through.
Yep.
So I'm sure you've got a little bit more to share about this, since you've been doing some recent research on mental
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah. I love that. I love that story. Mental practice is so powerful. But like your son, like it seems dumb. Like, why should I do this? Like, I'm not on the instrument. Like, this isn't going to do anything. But yeah, the research on mental practice, it shows a couple things. One, there's a study I always talk about where they took people who had never played any instrument ever and they had to learn how to play a 5 note scale up and down on the piano. And there were three groups, the practice group, the mental practice group, and the control group. And they were looking at their progress on playing this little thing over the course of the study, but they were also measuring the size of the area of the brain that controls the fingers, because in other research, they've found that if you use a body part very sort of intensely and specifically the way musicians tend to use their fingers, that part of the brain gets bigger as a result. And so they thought that in the physical practice group, the part of the brain controlling the fingers would get bigger over the course of the study. The question was, would anything happen in the mental practice group? And what they found was that the part of the brain that controls the fingers in both the physical and the mental practice group got bigger to nearly the same extent, which is kind of wild if you think about it. Like they actually changed the physical structure of their brain just from thinking. Like that's kind of like a superpower. So that's one thing that happens. Another thing that they found in the mental practice research is that when people only do physical practice or only do mental practice, it's not nearly as good as doing the two of them together. And most musicians only do physical practice, right? And they don't do any mental practice. But like you saw with your son, when you do some mental practice, it really makes a difference. Part of the reason it makes a difference, in addition to like physically changing the brain, is in order to mental practice, you have to really understand what you're trying to do. Like with your son, right? Like he didn't get the feedback from the cello to tell him if he was doing it right. And so he really had to know what the
Yes.
fingering was, right? And really had to think about, okay, how do I play this? And they found that when people mental practice, the word is mental representations, basically your sort of understanding of how something is done. People's mental representations get a lot more detailed and functional and richer sort of all the way around, because it's harder, because you're not getting the feedback, in this case, from the instrument. And then when you do put it on the instrument, it's just a lot easier because then you're getting that feedback, but you do have that understanding in your mind. And often when we mental practice, it has to be a lot richer from different angles. Like when I mental practice, I need to make sure, okay, can I hear what it's supposed to sound like the pitches, the quality of sound, dynamics, like all the sound-based things. But I also want to make sure I can feel what it's supposed to feel like what are my fingers doing, what's my bow doing, like all the intricacies involved in both of those things. And it's really easy to kind of not pay attention to some of that stuff or kind of take it for granted when you're playing, because especially the sound, like the instrument produces it. Um,
Yeah.
and so you don't really have to have a clear sense in your mind, but if you do have a clear sense, it makes it a lot better.
Yeah, this is reminding me a lot of the advantages of teaching something,
Yeah, right.
right? Because,
Right.
all of a sudden, you know how to do something, you feel real confident about it, and whether it's like, oh, I took the exam and I got 100% or whatever. You're
Yeah.
like, I'm great. I must know this 100%. Then you go to try to teach it and you're like, somebody
Wait.
asks you a question and you're like, wait, I don't know. And it's building, there's a deeper model, and it's almost
Right.
just like you said, it's like when you're taking the test is there to give you
Yeah.
the questions in the first place and give
Right.
you the optional answers of all the multiple choice or whatever,
Right.
versus you've got to build your own
Yeah.
model now in your brain, and your
Yeah.
brain has to have all of the little support structures to the main thing that goes
Right.
on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. No, you have great analogies. That's a great analogy too, because yeah, you're right. Like, and they always say, like, in order to really understand something, try to teach it to somebody, because
Mm.
if you don't have all of that built out, like you just said, if you try to explain it to someone and you realize you have all these holes, and the person, asks you, well,
Yeah.
what about this? And you're like, I don't know, hold on, and you realize where you don't really understand it.
Yeah, it's like you're creating a little virtual reality simulator in your brain
Yeah,
when you do this, right?
yeah,
That just
totally.
wasn't there.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I never thought about it that way. Um, how about sort of the concepts of flexibility and repetition, right? So
Yeah.
I could do things in nuanced and different ways, but maybe that's just kind of distracting me and I'm becoming unfocused versus, paint the fence for Mr. Miyagi exactly the same way each time and I'm become the master,
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think the answer is nuanced. I think a lot of musicians think and practice in such a way, and I'm definitely guilty of this myself, that like you're trying to create like the one perfect version so you can recreate that in a performance. And so you try to do like exact repetitions of something. However, what the research has found is if you can only do it in one very specific way, that makes the skill very like brittle and not very flexible, not very what's the word I'm looking for? It just breaks down under
Robust,
pressure. Yeah, it's not very
durable,
robust.
yeah.
That's a good word. Yeah. Whereas if you can do something in a whole bunch of different ways, you have a broader, more flexible version of the skill, and then it's much less likely to break down. So a famous study that I talk about a lot was done with kids throwing beanbags, and they had one group of kids throw beanbags to a target that was 3 feet away. And then the other group of kids threw beanbags to two targets, one that was 2 feet away, one that was 4 feet away. And then they tested the kids on throwing these beanbags, and the test was on a target 3 feet away. You'd think the kids that practiced throwing the beanbag to the 3 foot target would do better, but actually the kids that threw the beanbag to the 2 foot and the 4 foot target did better because they created a more flexible version of the skill. They had to know, okay, to throw it 2 feet, I do this, to throw it 4 feet, I do this. And so then they could calibrate 3 feet better in a high pressure situation, a test. And so, but the other
Mm-hmm.
part of this story with this research, it's called variable practice when you practice in a variable way, is when
Yeah.
someone's skill level is relatively low. If there's too much variability, it totally messes them up because their skill level is low. There's already a lot of variability inherent in it because they kind of suck at it. And if you put in more variability, it's just too much at
Yeah.
once, and the brain can't make sense of it. But once somebody is at a higher skill level, if it's too uniform, then it's essentially boring and too easy. And the brain's like, whatever, like this isn't important. And so then you have to make it more variable to challenge the brain in a good way. So how much variability you work in versus more like exact repetitions depends on where you are in the learning process. Um, so by skill level, it's not necessarily like a beginner pianist should have no variability, a professional pianist should have lots of variability. It's where are you as an individual in your learning of this thing. So for instance, I'm a professional violist, but I just started something brand new this morning in my practicing a new section of this piece that I'm learning. And so my practice on that was very uniform because it's brand new and it was really hard and I needed to play it in tune. But once I get better at that section and I can play it, then I need to practice in a whole bunch of different ways to challenge myself, so that when I get up on stage and it's another way, essentially, that I have the flexibility to play it however I want in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny when you mentioned beanbags. I thought this is totally outlandish, but I thought you were going to say they had kids throw beanbags at the player while they're practicing. So, so you could really have all the, different scenarios. What,
That's funny.
but that's another thing with my son, we'll be in the lessons. I play a big cello, to
Uh-huh.
like practice with him and he
Yeah.
does his thing. Of course the focus is on him, but every once in a
Right.
while, you know, I'll be doing something and he'll stop, and
Yeah.
and the teacher will say, "Why do you stop?" And he'll say, "Papa's holding the bow the wrong way,"
I love
or
it.
something. And the teacher goes, "Yeah, okay, but you need to continue playing," And he's talking about, if you're gonna be in the performance, we're gonna do the
Yeah.
recital, right? There's gonna be somebody sneezing. There's gonna be,
Right.
all these different possibilities. I'm gonna drop something or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes he complains I dropped something or whatever that
Right.
distracted him. Um, and so you didn't make it that extreme. You just practicing a little, but the principle is the same,
Principle's
right?
the same. Yeah.
You cannot predict the environment of
Right.
playing
Right.
with 100% accuracy. So how could you ever model the actual performance
Right.
to fit the environment for the performance? It's just never going to happen.
It's
So
never
you
going to
have
happen.
to have at least enough variability in the
Right.
situation to compensate for how reality unfolds in unexpected ways. Yeah.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Exactly.
That's great. That's very refreshing. I mean, that just for me as a person, I'm a very as you can see, maybe my propensity towards analogies, even I'm someone who operates on principles, right?
Yeah.
I'd
Same.
rather have a
Same.
principle about how to
Mhm.
do something
Yep.
than learn exactly how to do it. Then I
Right.
just show up and I apply the principles, and I didn't know how it was going to go, but it went okay. It does
Right.
backfire. If just have something that you really need to just bang out very efficiently,
Yeah. Right.
if you're just searching for principles and you don't have some rote method of doing it.
Right.
Um, let's see here. I would love to touch upon, let me see here, the memorization topic.
Sure.
Any tips there? And also just kind of getting to a level of confidence, like how I
Yeah.
know I'm ready,
Right.
that I can trust myself with something versus that, oh, I just didn't do that one more practice and it's gonna fall apart.
Right. Yeah. Great question. So I'll try to answer it in a succinct way. So when we perform from memory, we're relying on our long-term memory, right? Hopefully that we didn't just like learn it yesterday and we're performing it from memory today. And when your brain makes long-term memories, there's 3 steps to the process: encoding, consolidation, and retrieval. And
Mm,
it's important to work on all 3 of them equally, because if any one part of the process isn't done well, essentially, then it seems like you don't remember it. So the first stage, encoding, is basically how the information gets into your brain, like in the first place. And brains really do not like information that feels like it's random or it exists in a vacuum. Um,
mm,
and so you
mm,
want to make sure that everything has deeper meaning or it's connected to something you already know, because then you'll hold on to it better. And so if it's just a bunch of random notes and rhythms on the page, it's going to be really hard for you to remember that. But if you can notice, like, oh, this part is just a whole bunch of C major arpeggios, just like in different ways, that makes it a lot easier to hold on to because it's part of a framework. Or if you know, oh, the structure of this song is ABA, and like the 2A sections are, the same except for the ending, like that makes it a lot easier to hold on to. If you know what you're trying to express, like emotionally, like, oh, this is the sad part, this is the happy part, just to put it very broadly, like that's going to help you memorize it. So making sure that you understand the music on a really rich, deep, multifaceted level is really, really helpful, not just like playing what's on the page. Second step, consolidation. Basically, the answer to this is to get enough sleep, because most of the consolidation means the information moving from short-term memory, which is where it goes initially, to long-term memory. That happens mostly while you're sleeping. So get enough sleep. That's easier said than done.
this is another place where it's like, it's like there is so much pressure to
Yeah,
just not get sleep for
right,
some reason.
right. It's
People are so
ridiculous.
impressed if
It's
you
so
just did,
dumb.
yeah, I only got 4 hours of sleep last night, so I deserve a
Terrible.
raise and you don't.
No.
I don't know about that.
No, no. If you're only getting 4 hours of sleep, you're not taking care of yourself and your brain's not working at full capacity. So I think you shouldn't
Yeah.
get a raise. But anyway, so that's the second step, consolidation, get enough sleep. The third step, retrieval, is essentially getting it back out again when you need it. And people tend to not test their retrieval enough and in enough different ways, going back to what we were just talking about with the variable practice. So when we're performing from memory, we're relying essentially on 3 different kinds of memory: our muscle memory, like what does it feel like to play; our aural memory, what does it sound like, what's the piece supposed to sound like; and then what's known as declarative memory, like what are the actual like notes and rhythms and things that are written down on the page. And most people have one of these that's their strong suit. For me, it's muscle memory. And most people rely on whichever one is strong for them, and they don't realize that either they need to shore up the other ones or even that they can shore up the other ones. So it's important to test them all separately. So for instance, to test your muscle memory for pianists, well, for anybody, play without sound. So for pianists, like don't press the keys down, or if you have an electric keyboard, like don't turn it on. And see if you can play from memory without getting the auditory feedback from the instrument, that you know what it, by feel, how it feels to play. To test your auditory memory, can you sing it from memory without kind of like miming along on the instrument, right? And can you do that from memory? And then to test declarative memory, like, can you write it out from memory? Get out some staff paper and try to write it out from memory. That's often really hard for people to do. But if you test your memory in these various ways, then they all reinforce each other. And it works a lot better. And then also, like you were saying with your son, like dropping things and whatever, like try to make it harder for yourself to perform it from memory. Something that I love to do to test my memory is to put on headphones and either play different music in my headphones or the same music as I'm playing from memory, just starting it so it's not with me. And so it's offset. That's really distracting to try to play from memory with other music playing. But if you can do that, you know that you have it memorized. Or have someone in the room trying to distract you, dropping things, making noise, pulling at your clothes, like, whatever. Because then that really tests your memory, and that gives you a lot more confidence in the performance, that like, okay, I know this because I could do it fine with all that ridiculousness, going on in the practice room. And then also the interleaved practice thing that we were talking about, that especially the parts that you're worried you might forget, like play them randomly out of the blue when you're not even thinking of that piece. Can you just start, in that spot that you're worried about when you've been in the middle of cooking dinner or practicing something completely different? And so sort of spot check yourself in that way. Can you just do it on the spot? And that helps your memory, but also gives you more confidence that you do actually know it.
Great stuff. Well, the hour has zoomed by. We're almost done here. And I want to do maybe like just a quick uh, pulling everything together. Or I
Sure.
have an idea for that. And then also, just kind of sharing, things that you, final words, wisdom, links and promotions and stuff like that. The way I like to cinch it all together is, the book is Learn Faster, Perform Better. I don't know if there's a subtitle, but
There
it
is a
doesn't say
subtitle.
learn music faster, perform music better. It says learn faster, perform better. So I'm curious if you found, I know it's directed towards musicians, but if you found there's sort of some generalizable, themes here where, the average person can take this away if they're just learning how to play football or, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah, there is a subtitle. The subtitle is A Musician's Guide to the Neuroscience of Practicing. But
Okay.
everything I talk about in my book applies generally to learning everything, period. And a
Sure.
lot
Yeah.
of the research I cite was not done on musicians. It was done on all sorts of athletes, surgeons, everyday people, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, everything we've talked about today in terms of like setting specific goals and monitoring how you're doing and taking breaks and interleaving your practice and having variability in there and sort of testing yourself in different ways. All of that applies to learning literally anything. It's
Mm.
just the specifics of, okay, what does this look like for learning how to play football versus learning how to speak Japanese versus learning how to play the piano, right? The specifics will be different, but like we were talking about with principles, the principles of it are the same regardless.
Great. And any place you want to send people? I mean, so they're going to go buy the book. We've mentioned the title. It's on Amazon,
Yep.
audiobook, physical copy. Any other little things to promote, to check out?
Sure. Yeah, so people can go to my website. It's just mollygebrian.com. I'm the only Molly Gebrian in the world, so I'm very easy to find, which is nice. On my website, I have a ton of videos on the science of practicing. They're also on my YouTube channel, which is again just my name. My website also has lots of like free PDFs that you can download. You don't even have to give me your sign up for my mailing list or give me your email. Just take them. Podcasts where I've been a guest in the past, you can go listen to those. I do have a newsletter. It comes out on the 1st, the 11th, and the 21st of each month. And it's one idea about practicing, one question to ask yourself about practicing, and one practice tip. It's really short and sweet. I don't like long newsletters. I don't have time to read those. I think it probably takes people 30 seconds to read, but people have said it's really helpful. So if that's of interest, people can sign up for that. But I'm very easy to find. I have lots of free resources around the internet. So
All right. Well, I'll walk us out. Thank you so much.
thank
We
you.
have reached the end of another musical journey here at Piano Tech Radio Hour. Thanks again to Molly Gebrian for joining us today, as well as folks that are joining us live on Saturday. As always, we're brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, cutting edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. For those of you that joined us today, by signing up for this session individually, you make your life more convenient. You subscribe to Piano Tech Radio at just $16 a month. You get the recording of today's session in a member area, as well as automatic registration for each week's new session. Sign up at bit.ly/join PTRH, bit.ly/join PTRH. Don't forget about the podcast, the blog on Substack. Get on the email newsletter on our website, and the social media is LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So thank you very much. Thanks, Molly. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all again next week. Bye.
Thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. Remember that you can catch us live online every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
That's right. Go to pianotechradio.com to register so you can interact live and ask questions of our guests.
See you next week.